Welcome to the 301 Podcast, the interview podcast for the hottest up-and-coming entrepreneurs, artists, and creators. Real, authentic, and inspiring. And here is your host, Marcus Engel. Let's get it started in 301.
Today in the 301 Podcast, Yves van Veen. He's the founder of Boost Your Flow, a well-being and vitality trainer, a certified Wim Hof instructor, and much, much more. Today we will talk about high-performance culture, we will talk about breathing, the code, and so much more. Yves, welcome to the 301 Podcast.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
I have to start with a little anecdote because I think it was quite special, at least for me. We had a call together, and my whole day was so filled with presentations and all those high energy calls, and I was super pumped. And then I had this call with you, which was just an exploration of hey, maybe you want to join the podcast. And I joined also with the same energy. I think I came in hey, how are you doing? And then I think you took 10, 12 seconds to think. And you said, I think I'm good today. And in this moment, our whole atmosphere, the whole call and the whole energy for me really shifted and changed. I was like, wow, this guy is calm. And also I hang up the call with you. And I thought wow, he's really in his element. He's so calm and he's so relaxed. It was really amazing. So today we're sitting here on a Thursday afternoon, and
Let's
I ask
bring
you
that here.
exactly,
Yeah.
and ask you the question again. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm feeling good. I think that's a better way, because you just mentioned, I said, I think I feel, blah, blah. That's often what we do, right? We check in with our mind. But I think that's why, especially for the topic of this podcast, I like to, take a moment to really check in with yourself, because so often we just say, yeah, I'm doing great, I'm really busy, that's what a lot of people say.
Yeah.
And I think feeling and really checking in with yourself, that's quite a skill, and it's something you should practice. And sometimes it's even difficult for me. So to come back to your question, how do I feel? Well, I just came from outside where the sun is shining. That was really nice. Saw a lot of happy people because of that. After all the rain, I just worked out. I had a long walk with the dog. It was a pretty good day. I feel excited here on the podcast. Yeah, looking forward to a fun conversation. Yeah,
that's gonna be one for sure.
Thank you.
And how do you do you have some sort of how do you get into this calmness mode as well? Is there something that you can put yourself into it, or is it just naturally to you?
I think it's a bit naturally, and I have to say sometimes it can frustrate people. For example, my fiance, and things happen. We just came back from a beautiful trip in Central America, and every now and then on a big trip like that, we were there for 2 months. Sometimes stuff happens, right? That that you weren't expecting, and then it can even frustrate her that I stay so calm. And but it's not that nothing is happening inside, of course. But I just try to see, what can we influence and what can we not influence. And I also learned that it's good to express your emotions. So that's something that I've been working on for the last 2-3 years, I think, and especially the last year. Because the other side of staying so calm is that you maybe don't give space for the emotions that you do experience, or that you suppress it a bit, right? So every good thing can have the other side as well. But I think it's maybe a bit natural, yeah.
And were you always calm also as a child, or is it?
No, not at all. No.
Okay, that's interesting.
No, I. My mom likes to joke that I spend more time on the hallway in school than in class, because I always had a lot of energy, and whenever the bell would ring and everyone had to go back inside, I would be up in the tree or something, and so I had a lot of struggles actually to sit still and pay attention. I remember that my teacher would say, yeah, I can play a recording with your name, because I keep repeating your name all the time, that you should pay attention. But I also think it wasn't that education system wasn't really for me. But I had a lot of energy when I was young. I think the older I got, the more it shifted, and the more I learned how to use it as well, and how to manage it. I think, yeah. When I was young, I couldn't really manage it, and and then I learned that. Yeah, I don't know how actually. Of course, I have some ideas. But but it shifted.
It's actually really interesting, because I think a lot of times, at least for me, I think I was super high energy as a child already, and nothing really has changed to now. So it's still I think I'm very super excited and stuff like this. But I also think people mix up a little bit calmness with calmness and excitement, right? or I think that's also something that, because you can be like still excited or something, or like happy, and like calm doesn't always mean, because I think there's also a misconception about calmness, right? A little bit like that you say, oh, you're more a quiet person, or like you're more introverted or something like this when you're calm.
Yeah,
exactly. But you could be the other way around, right?
Yeah. So when I was young, I would say that I was a 100% extrovert. And also when I started working, I remember we were doing this MBTI training, and that's is one of these personality tests that you could do, and about what drives you. And I remember we did this test that the trainer asked everyone to take a position on the line, and all the way on the right side would be introvert, and all the way on the left side would be extrovert. And I remember I was then like 24 or so. And I was standing all the way on that extrovert side. And later on, also after experiencing, I've never been burnout, luckily, but I definitely, have been going into that direction at some point. And that's where I also discovered the power of spending time with yourself, and then, going for that, finding that calmness. How important it is to recharge your energy. And so now I would say I'm more like what they call an omnivert. So I think when I feel good, when I have good energy, I love to be extrovert. So it's about what gives you energy, right? It's some people make the mistake that they think extrovert is about that you want to speak up and share your ideas, and but it's actually about what gives you energy. Does it give you energy to spend time with people? Or does it give you energy to spend time just with yourself, right? So I like both, actually. Yeah, depends a bit on the state, on the moment. When after I spend a lot of time with people and giving trainings, for example, I run a lot of sessions and workshops, and then everyone is watching you. You have to guide the energy, and you have to guide them through all the activities. And afterwards, I was like a moment for myself.
When I looked at your career, like from like an outside perspective, like it seemed like that until around like 2019, 2020, you had like this typical marketing entrepreneur career. So, would you sign it off? Is that right? Like bachelor, master, startup?
Yeah, more or less.
I think after, or like during your master studies, you founded a startup, Chance Collective.
Yeah.
How was this first like founding experience, like also like as a student basically, and then like founding quite a cool startup that I think maybe you can tell us a little bit about what the startup is and how you came up with the idea.
Yeah, cool that you bring it up, because it has been so long ago already, and it was a fun journey. But I think just to take one more step back is that I was always good with numbers, and now looking back, I didn't really enjoy being good in numbers, but I remember that my teachers, but also friends of mine, would say, "Hey, you're lucky, man. Like you're good with numbers. You know how much money you can make as a banker, for example." And I always felt a bit of the lucky kid, right? So I am good in numbers, and some people had to redo their tests, for example, and I didn't. So I felt like, hey, this is one of my talents, right? So then they tend to push you a bit more to economics, and I did, and so I did economics and business and a specialization in finance, getting really good degrees. And then when I was still quite young, I already had what they call like a serious side business or a side job, working for an investment bank. And I remember, I think I was 22 or so, and I was by far the youngest of all the people who worked in that investment bank, and I was doing sales there. And I would be talking to these people who maybe would be like, I don't know, 40, 50, 60 years old. And they are having this conversation with you about how to, whether they should put their money in that investment bank, right? That was a crazy experience. But I also realized really quickly that corporate setting wasn't really for me, because I would get some really good ideas from clients, then go to my manager, say, hey, I have this great idea, right? I was talking to this client, and he said, why didn't you do X or Z, right? And he said, oh, yeah. You know what? Send me an email with the idea, and I'll see if I can share it with my manager, right? Because there was the hierarchical structure. And pretty soon I felt that I stranded with all my creativity that I also had. And then I realized that, that corporate setting wasn't really for me. And not so long after, I got a phone call of a friend of my sister who had a really cool startup. And he said, hey, I heard you're good in sales. Why don't you come work with me? And I'll learn you a lot about entrepreneurship. but you're gonna make 50% probably of what you're making at the moment because I'm a startup. And then I took that chance, and that's and suddenly I was going with him to sales meetings with other entrepreneurs, a lot of people with small businesses, and they were sitting behind their own steering wheel. And suddenly I felt like, hey, it's not just about macro and business. You can really build your own business and build your own path. And that's what excited me for changing my career. So that's when I made the decision to do a master's in entrepreneurship. And then I was learning a lot about entrepreneurship, and of course, doing all these cool courses. Then I felt like, you can only learn about entrepreneurship if you do it, right? And so that's when I, as a student, founded Gents Collective with a friend of mine, with the goal to learn about entrepreneurship and not with the goal to make money. But it was a really cool, it was a fun experience. We had clients in 8 countries or so.
And what was the general idea about?
Yeah, so back then the subscription boxing was really upcoming. So like HelloFresh and stuff, and also like the Dollar Shave Club, and so that you have a subscription for something that comes back every month, for example. And I always like to go to these fun and cool stores for men where they have all these, special accessories or stuff, or clothing brands that people don't know yet, or vintage stuff. And I had a lot of friends who would ask me for advice for even where to buy their clothes, but also where to buy gifts, because I knew those secret stores, right? And then I thought, well, imagine if you have a subscription to the Gents Collective box with stuff for gents, for men, and it's about stuff that you probably don't know yet, like from upcoming brands, and you get more value than you pay for, because those brands want to have their early adopters because they're quite new. So that was that box, and you will get like 4 to 5 accessories ranging from local brewed vodka in Amsterdam to a cool sock brand with cool patterns or stuff, and like a lot of things. Yeah, it was really fun.
That's super cool idea.
Yeah, or a nice pocket knife and from a local maker or something. Yeah.
And you said it was all about learning.
Yeah.
What was your main outcome, your main learning that maybe also others can learn from that period?
Yeah. My main learning there was that you should just start to learn and not just think about it. And I founded it with a friend of mine, Martijn. And back then he already had 2 small businesses that he even sold while he was really maybe he was 20 years old or so. And he was just super handy in with all this sales and stuff and seeing the opportunities, but really taking them as well, right? And I would often go to him and say, Martijn, imagine if you have an app that solves this or that. And Martijn, what if you have a startup that can do this or that for you? And then he always would tell me, yeah, great ideas, but it's not about the idea. It's entrepreneurship is about really doing it and building that startup, building that business, really getting that product out there. And I realized that he was right. So at some point I came up with that idea of Gents Collective. Then I went to him and I said, hey, now I'm really serious. And if you're in, we're going to do it together. And that's when you start learning, when you start. Yeah.
You said also before that now you would not do the startup anymore because now you have like also different values. Like at this point of time, when you've started when you had the startup, what was important for you in this point of time?
In my life?
Yeah, what were you what was world looking like? What were your values? Like, how did you look at life?
What were my values back then? I think over time I became more aware of that consumerism, even though I still like nice products. It's not that I don't care about it at all. I still like that, but I don't want to drive unnecessary consumerism. What were my values? Yeah, I was already like, just like today, what would my path be like, right? I remember going on a trip after I graduated. I went to South Africa, to one of the best kite surfing places in the world. And I was already dreaming about that for years. And I knew when I graduated, I got there. And then back then I had that small business. And I was there. I couldn't sleep for nights because I was just thinking about like, hey, what would my career path be like? And I knew one thing. I didn't want to become that boring office guy, that threw his dream away of building his own path and just does whatever his manager wants, for example. So that was one thing I knew I didn't want. I also knew I wanted to, eventually give space to my entrepreneurial spirit that I found. But I also knew that I needed some more experience. So that was something that was already on my mind, like authenticity, and following my path. And staying close to myself. I think there was a lot on my mind, and I worried about that a lot, because I also felt the expectations of society, of friends, and family and other students that I studied with about what path you should take, instead of what paths really suit you. And so that was already a lot on my mind. And one thing that was also a big value of mine back then. When I was in South Africa on the last day, I tattooed a really cool tattoo of a wave on my arm to remind me that whenever I need to make an important decision, that when I look at that wave, I know that I should always go for something that that really excites me instead of a good business opportunity or so. So I wanted to stay loyal to myself actually, and not go for money or something. Yeah. So those things were really on my mind back then. Yeah, and still.
Yeah, I was just about to ask, like, is there still something like on your mind? Like, are you still following those same values?
Yeah,
or did they become stronger?
Yeah, and I think a lot of things have changed, of course, but I think those values were already really present back then. Yeah.
Because I think that, like, also my preparation, I think it was very interesting, like from an outside perspective, like until that point that I said before, 2019, 2020. It looked quite linear, like, okay, so he's a young, ambitious guy, is doing his master, is having his first own startup. Then you started to work as a consultant, as a project manager. But something, and I'm going to find that out now. Yeah. What changed, like, in this period where you were, like, your marketing consultant, and then you said, like, I think that's not it. Like, I think I have to do something different. And I think you took quite a different path to where you are now. Yeah. And I think it happened in this time working as a consultant.
Yeah. So after I worked for a few years as a consultant, and even though there was in a company where you can only be hired if you have an entrepreneurial dream. So that was the one thing that they ask you, like, hey, you can work here for, let's say, 3 years. And then I think 90% of the people have to go. They have to leave the company. And the ideal scenario is that you start your own business. But not everyone does that. So I was still working on that entrepreneurial dream when I was being a consultant. But what I also realized there is that, when you have a lot of things in your mind and you do a lot of projects, that it's really easy to lose a lot of energy because you're working hard, right? And I did all the studies, my bachelor, my master, and then I have that consultant job, and people would say, hey, you're doing quite well. But no one ever learned me how to manage my energy, for example. So at some point, I really, maybe we can talk about that later, but at some point I learned about energy management, also when I learned about breathing and ice baths and stuff. And I found that so interesting that I really felt a strong drive to shift my career more in that field, to that employee well-being and the well-being field, learning other people how to do that. So then I worked for an employee well-being company, a training company, for a few years to become a partner there. So in that way, I could still use my entrepreneurial spirit in that company. But at the moment where I would get my shares, COVID hit, and they lost, I think maybe even up to 50% of their clients and stuff. So a lot of things changed, and then they said, hey, we can't do that in this moment because we also need to, reorganize the company and make sure that we survive, because they had a whole team. And then I felt, well, now I'm on this, on the edge of jumping or so, like, just fate is now really asking me, hey, do you really want to start your own business or not? Because if you do want to start your own business, this is the moment. And then I remember driving home from that conversations with those founders and realizing that it was not about to happen in that moment to become a partner. I went to my sister's place, who was really important for me in my life. I said, man, I'm so disappointed, I thought I could become a partner there. And then she said, hey, but I really believe that you have the talents and the drive to start your own business. Why don't you start for yourself? And I said, I don't know if I could actually do that, right? And then she said, no, I believe in you. And then her husband said, I believe in you too. And I felt like, fuck, man, we're gonna do it. So I drove home, and until 3 a.m. I worked on my own, my little strategy for starting my business.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I felt really clear. That's where I made the decision. We'll never forget that moment. That was a really cool night. So I could turn that disappointment really quickly, actually in just a few hours, I felt that was the momentum to make that decision. Now from there on, of course, it's really difficult and it took time. And at first you don't make any money, and we can also talk about that later, of course. But now I'm in a good place, being myself, having my own business, making people happy. Yeah, so that's a good thing.
And was there like a specific trigger? Like, was it like maybe like a book or like an event or something that you attended, or was that more like kind of like gradually going towards this whole well-being direction?
There was actually a pivoting moment, and that was at some point I already told my managers twice or so that I felt that I had very little energy because I had to commute a lot. I had a project that was almost in Germany, and I was living in Amsterdam, so sometimes I would go back and forth at least 2 hours both ways. And that resulted in not, when I would come home late, I didn't want to go to the supermarket and cook healthy stuff. I felt like, hey, let's just get something easy and quick, right? Which wasn't always the most healthiest. And I loved working out back then. I was doing CrossFit and other stuff. But then I felt like, I still need to eat, and I don't want to work out too late because then I can sleep. You know what? I'll skip the working out. And at some point you get into this downward spiral of losing energy. And and then another trip to South Africa was coming up with one of my best friends. And then I told him, hey, I can't come to all the parties, to all the surf sessions, to all the hikes up the mountains because I have very little energy. And I almost felt a bit ashamed to tell him because we would always have these super active holidays together. So I took really clear goals. One was to renew my energy, and the other one was to find connection with myself again, because I lost that a bit in the process of working my ass off. And in that surf house where we were staying, there were some other older guys who had their things. Who had a nice job, and they were fit and they were having fun. And I felt like, hey, I want to get to that point as well. And in the night, I remember one of the guys said, hey, when are we going to breathe again? When are we going to breathe? And they were so excited about breathing. And I said, are you talking about breathing? Like, what do you mean? And they said, oh, you never heard about breathwork? And I said, no. And I said, hey, but you're from the Netherlands, right? You know Wim Hof. I said, I don't know Wim Hof. Who's Wim Hof? And then we had this conversation with these, from my perspective, really cool guys that I looked up to. And they were so hyped about breathing, about ice baths. And it was the first time in my life I heard about that. And you can talk a lot about it, but you have to experience it to really understand it. So later on, they said, hey, watch this documentary and do this technique on YouTube. And I did that. And then, from there on, a lot of things changed because then I found also the power of breathing and ice baths.
Crazy.
Yeah.
It's a super cool story, actually. Like, it's really nice also, like, that, like, I think I had a similar experience with Wim Hof. I think I've also never heard from him. And then at one point, like, some people told me, I think it was like some Forbes magazine article or something, that I was like, kind of like this whole world opened up where you were like, oh,
super
that's interesting. Eh? Can you then still remember like the first time that you can you still remember the first time that you really like went into the cold? Because you then I think probably started with breathwork, like first on your own. But did you then like join a course or join like one of the events, or like what were like the next steps in that journey?
Yeah. I remember the first time was via a YouTube video doing the breathing techniques. And then I saw Wim, and I felt like, hey, who's this modern wizard with that long beard and hair and talking like this, And so quite a weird man, but he's also super interesting. I felt like, hey, I trust you. I wanna try it. And he said, okay, lay down. So I was laying down in my room where I was living back then in Amsterdam. And he said, yeah, now we're gonna breathe like this. Just follow me. So I did that, and then even even though I was just doing it by myself, being guided via YouTube, I already felt that, the effect. And there were two things that really, that really hit me, that I felt like, hey, this is something that I can really use. One was that back then I had a lot of stress. So if I would be going to bed and close my eyes to sleep, I would still see my emails coming in, right? And I think everyone has been in a moment like that, probably. And after doing the breathing, I had no thoughts. I wasn't thinking about the future, also not about the past. I was just being present, and I had a clear mind, which was really welcome. And the other one was that I felt really close to myself, like I found that connection again. And from that state of being, I felt a lot of confidence that I perfectly knew which decisions to make for the more complex questions that I had about careers and stuff. And so I felt like, hey, if I come back often enough to a state like this, I'm pretty sure things will work out, and they did. Yeah.
Cool. Most people, when they visit like an event, or when they go somewhere and have like some enlightening moment, and they think like, oh, I have to do this more often, and most of the time they don't. And I think for you, what really strikes me a lot is like that you had this moment where you kind of got exposure to well-being, to kind of like recharging, to finding your energy, to Wim Hof method and stuff like this. And you really did something with this. Why do you think it's so difficult for people to stick to like a routine, or to stick to something that is actually good for them?
That's a good question. And, that's a really hard question also to answer, because I still struggle with that every now and then myself. I remember that there was a moment where I told myself that back then I had a freezer back home where I could jump into. It's an ice bath, right? So like an ice bath that's cold every day, because the water would just be on a constant level. And then I told myself, I want to do an ice bath every day. So you could say that's a routine, right? And at some point, I also started to lose the fun, because I was forcing myself to do the routine. And then I questioned myself, is this really something that helps me, or is it something that, I want to make the decision to do it? And so I stopped being so hard on myself as well. So I think a lot of people maybe want to build certain routines because they believe it can really help them, but it shouldn't feel like a punishment, right? It should come from a good intention, from that you want to make the decision to actually follow up on a good habit. So I actually now love the approach of not having like really strict routines and habits, but knowing your toolbox more or less, with a lot of things that can help you to manage your energy, to manage your focus, to whatever helps you to follow your path, right? And then knowing which ingredients to take to use in the right moment. I think that's maybe a much better way of using it, instead of just building these hard routines that sometimes I hear these words like the non-negotiables in my morning routine, And I prefer the approach where you say, hey, I know 4 or 5, 6 things that makes me really, then when I use that in the morning, that often help me to have a really good day. And I like to pick 1 or 2 every morning, and if sometimes I skip a day, that's also fine. I think it comes along with a much nicer energy.
I agree. I think that's also the difficult thing, right? Like I think the more harder regimes you do, like the easier it's also to fail, right? So like I think I tried also like many challenges or something like this, and you really see that I tried the 75 hard challenge, for example. And then like the requirements are so high that the moment you fail once, like, I mean, of course the rule is the moment you fail once, you have to start over again. But like you have so many things to do that like there's also life that catches up, right? So, and I realized then I did 75 soft, which was much more like forgiving in a way. That you say like, oh, I still did it, and I still didn't do all the workouts. But then, if you then don't work out 75 days, but 72 or 70, then you still did an amazing progress, and you don't have to punish yourself for the 5 that you didn't do, So that's also why, like, I think that's super important, like with building habits, that you are not too strict with yourself and not start like too crazy.
Yeah. So, and this, then that you make the decision yourself to choose, doing that habit instead of telling yourself that you have to do it, and that it comes from, that energy that they say, I need to force myself because I made that decision and now I have to follow up. I know there's a lot of men out there who also love that energy, right? But I think self-love is also important, and not being so strict on yourself is often a lot nicer. I also love warm showers, man. I remember at some point I was on a party, and a guy walked up to me and I said, "Hey, you're a friend of my friend, right? I heard you are a Wim Hof method instructor. That's cool." And I said, "Oh yeah, well thanks." And I said, "What about yourself? Have you ever tried it?" And he said, "Man, I've for 3 years in a row, I've only taken cold showers. Doesn't matter if it's winter or summer." I said, "Whoa, respect, man! Like that's cool." And he said, "Yeah, I never skip a day. Even if I feel sick, I still take cold showers." Wow, that's impressive, right? You could say that. There's a really good routine there. Then, but I felt the way he was telling me this, and so I asked him, "Can I ask you a personal question?" He said, "Yeah, of course." And I said, "What about self-love? Like, do you have what about self-love for you?" And he said, "Oh, why do you ask me that?" I said, "Yeah, because it sounds like you're also really hard on yourself. I think it's also really nice if you can some days also tell yourself, hey, let's enjoy a warm shower if you feel like it." And he said, "Yeah." And then he said, "Wow, like he told me that he was really working on that, and that he was so hard on himself, and he realized he doesn't have a lot of self-love, and that gave him a lot of troubles with other stuff and things." So again, I think knowing that cold showers, for example, could also be a lot of other things, that they help you in a certain way. I think that's the most important thing. And make sure that you come back to it often enough, but don't be too hard on yourself that you have to do that every day.
Yeah.
A lot of people think that they should do that to I don't know, be successful or something. You see a lot of these videos on YouTube as well, like the 7 habits that most millionaire entrepreneurs do every morning. And then people want to copy it and with the idea that they become that millionaire entrepreneur. But that's bullshit.
Yeah. The cold shower will probably not get you €1 million.
No,
and for the ones who do, please reach out, because I want to interview you on the podcast.
Yeah.
Really amazing.
I would be a rich man.
Exactly. When we talk about what I found super interesting is like when we talked about energy, you said like, yeah, I was a little bit low on energy and everything, but like in the end, it was, I think, the energy and the flow that really steered you to this right direction. I think in a place where you are like today. You also founded, I think, 2 years ago, your own company with Boost Your Flow. Can you tell us a little bit about like what this company is and what the company does, and how people also can work together with you?
Yeah. So with Boost Your Flow, I give workshops and trainings a lot in companies, with companies, and it's all about balancing your well-being with your performance. So I have a lot of ambition, I have a lot of drive. And I don't want to be relaxed all day. I also want to challenge myself and to use that drive and to achieve great things. But I also know that if you want to achieve great things, that it also costs you a lot of energy, right? So I learned through experience that you also need to make time to recharge your energy and to take good care of yourself. Because if you only push and push and push yourself, then at some point you're gonna be burned out. So it's about balancing your the performance with your well-being. And which is actually about energy and focus management. So how does your brain work? How do you deal with distractions? Can you focus on what's important and deal with all the other distractions that are not important, which is really difficult nowadays? And on the other hand, it's more about energy management. So do you know what works for you? Because I can tell you what works for me, but you are a different person. Maybe it doesn't work for you. So you need to go on a journey to discover your toolbox, right? So it's about making people more aware of that, and also giving them a bit of push in a program, so that they use the program as an opportunity to start building those habits and routines. Because sometimes in the beginning it can be really helpful to build your habits, and later on what works for you in the right moment, and then you can just choose to use it whenever you need it. And so I work a lot with companies with a lot of change, a lot of pressure to perform, a lot of young people, a lot of distractions, and especially in that type of places, is really relevant to learn about that. And on the other hand, of course, while being a certified Wim Hof method instructor, I also give workshops about breathing sessions and ice baths and stuff. And pretty soon I'm gonna start my own retreat, which is coming. So that I heard that yesterday that's actually going to happen. So that's pretty cool. And we're also working on some other stuff, like launching a small program on how to start your own business in the well-being world, which is also about to come pretty soon. So yeah,
A lot
I'm
of
an
exciting
entrepreneurial guy
things.
with a lot of ideas, and it's all about following your own path, daring to go out of your comfort zone, but meanwhile taking good care of yourself. I think that's the most important message.
I think a lot of people would argue that well-being and performance don't go hand in hand. And I found your approach, like also on your website, as very interesting, that you say like actually it's kind of like nurturing from each other. So like, can you explain, maybe without maybe going too deep, like how you look at this kind of thing? Because I think, a lot of people say like, oh, either I perform or I recharge, but you say like kind of like they eat off each other and like feed each other.
Yeah, I think someone who on a constant basis works 80 hours or even 60 hours, I think that's madness. And I will not give you compliments for that. I think that's stupid, right? And I think the real opportunity is to work smarter instead of harder. It's easy to work hard. You just need to work your ass off and make a lot of hours. But I think many people are just staring at their screens at some point, while not even being productive. Yeah, maybe on a really low level, but they're not getting so much things done. And there's a lot of science that, for example, supports that it's a lot more beneficial to take breaks, to make time to recharge, and that we can only focus a few hours a day on a deeper level. And for the rest of the day, we're just also doing some simple stuff. And a lot of people who like to brag that they work 80 hours a week often also fool themselves that they are probably so productive. Maybe they are 80 hours a week in the office or something, or in front of the laptop, but they're not like super productive. So I like the idea of how can we work smarter instead of harder, and that's a bit. I think there's a lot of things that apply to everyone, and there's also some things that maybe might work for me and maybe not don't work for you. And I help them to find their playbook to see what works for them. Yeah. And to make them more aware of the importance as well.
And if you make it now like a little bit more practical, let's say I'm a guy who is a high achiever. I work 80 hours a week. I'm really proud of it. Like, where can you start? Like, I think because a starting point, I think, is always the most difficult thing.
Yeah.
Like, what are the things that they can do today, maybe to move more towards balancing out the well-being and the performance?
Yeah. Well, what I like to do with a training that I have is it's about mastering your energy and focus. During that workshop, we score ourselves on more or less the 8 most important pillars of energy and focus management. And at the end of that session, people have a clear idea of their low-hanging fruit of the areas that they could improve on. And it will be different for everyone. But it starts by becoming more aware of your own way of working. And because we all have our way of working. If I would now, for example, give you an advice for a podcast you should listen, or I give you a new task with a new responsibility that comes along with that task, like how do you process that? You have a lot of other priorities. How are you going to make sure that you get that done in the right moment? That's your way of working, right? And now we are focusing here, but maybe there's something else on your mind that it might be distracting you. How do you manage all that? That's your way of working. So I make people more aware of that we all have that way of working. And from there on, we're going to review like, what parts of that are smart and which are might be a little bit reactive to all the distractions that are around in the modern workplace. And I think especially focus is one of the things that I see that a lot of people want to improve on, because especially if you work in a team or in a company, how many incoming messages do you have via Slack, via Teams, via email, via WhatsApp? People calling you, people walking over to your desk, constantly interrupting your concentration level, right? And every time you get interrupted, you jump back on that scale with your focus. And you need some time to get back into that deeper level of focus. And I think that's, for most people, that's one of the most important things that they realize in a workshop like that, how often their focus gets interrupted and the effect on their productivity. So from there on, it's not just about what that individual is going to do, but it's also about how do you manage that on, for example, a team level, because a lot of these things that you could look into is also more related to the people that you work with. How do you manage that as a team, as a group, or an organization? So it comes back to culture, actually, which is really interesting. And that's why you should get more people involved than just yourself if you find it interesting. And and to discover also with that team how you could, for example, make new team agreements with everyone who's involved, make sure that they are there. And then in that moment, you can, for example, say, hey, if you have a small question, then maybe save 2-3 questions and then interrupt someone instead of asking every simple question. But this is just one simple example. I think there's maybe like 20 or 30 of those things that happen just all the time. And if we don't talk about it, and if we don't have that moment where someone, joins your workshop and gets a mirror and then suddenly realizes, hey, we are doing so many of these inefficient, stupid things that are not really helping us. And then everyone agrees, but why didn't change it? Because everyone is just busy and running all the time. Yeah. So sometimes you need to slow down to speed up.
Yeah, slow down to speed up. That's a good one. When I look at you, and I think that's also a little bit how we started. I said like, oh, you always look so like calm and like collected. But you also said during the conversation that like, oh, I also get stressed a lot of times. And like, how do you cope with stress? Like, how do you switch off? Like, what tactics do you use to unplug?
Yeah. Well, stress, of course, is only good or bad depending on whether you can recover from it, right? So stress is not something that I would try to avoid. I think even if I could hit a button here and make sure that I will have a stress-free life, I will not hit it, because stress is also really nice to experience every now and then. But I think the main problem is that people get stuck in that stress mode, and that whenever they want to achieve great things in work, for example, and they experience stress, which is not necessarily bad. But when they get home and they want to have some time with their children, with their family, and at some point they go to bed and they want to sleep well because they want to recover, but they still feel stressed. So they get stuck in that stressful mode. I think that's one of the biggest challenges. So one of the best skills that you could work on if you work in that high performance type of culture is to learn how to switch between that active mode, right, where you experience some stress, whether it be good or bad, and that relaxation mode, right, where you can actually renew your energy. And maybe we're getting to the breath, for example, but there are also a lot of other ways. Learning to make that switch is that's a game changer. Yeah, learning how to regulate your nervous system.
And how can you do that?
Yeah, and so again, of course, there are several options, but one of the main things that I like to learn people is how you could use your breath to do that. And the cool thing is that it's all science-based, even though working with the breath is already thousands of years old. So you could say it's ancient wisdom with some modern scientific insights, and that really helps also to bring that into companies and to bring it into the Western world, because we like to understand how things work, right? How it works. And so how that works is, I think most people know that if you experience something, maybe something scary or so, that could affect your breath. It's more like this. You can get scared, and then it changes your breath. And also, if you're super relaxed, it also changes your breath. It gets really calm, and maybe it's more like an exhale. And if you are working on a deadline, maybe already for weeks, and you're not sure if you can make it, sometimes we don't even breathe at all. We just walk around through the office while holding our breath, right? So that's how your state influences your way of breathing. But the cool thing is, and that's that could be a game changer, is that it works both ways. So it's what you could say, it's two-way traffic. So if you change the way that you breathe, you can also change the way that you feel. So let's say you are in a stressful situation, and then you realize that you are stressed. You also feel that in your muscles. And then when you change how you breathe to a way that you would normally only do if you are super relaxed, then you send that information more or less to your brain that receives it. And you will tell your brain like, hey, look at the way I'm breathing. It's okay. You can relax. And that's why we use the ice bath also as a training tool, because that's a stressful situation. Your brain will ask you like, hey, what are you doing? Why are you sitting in this ice bath? You're not going to survive. Get the hell out of here. And then you change the way that you breathe to a way that you would normally only do if you're super relaxed. And suddenly your nervous system is calming down because of the way that you breathe. And you can also use that in other icebud moments in your life, so to say. So whenever you are about to give a presentation and you feel a bit anxious, or whenever you're about to have that feedback moment, or make the decision to start working for yourself, for example, it's all quite scary. And if you feel that your body reacts to that moment, you can also regulate that reaction by changing the way that you breathe.
Super interesting, I think. Now I want to join one of the workshops.
You're more than welcome.
to do it. If you look back at your life so far, what do you think gave you the biggest lesson?
I think I lost my father when I was relatively young. I think, and I was about to become a man, and I just started studying, and then my father died of cancer, and that made me realize at that young age that life is not forever, and that you should spend your time wisely because you never know when it will be your last day. So that was one of the most impactful moments in my life that, gave me a lot of motivation to make the most out of it. And I think for a few years, I mistaked that by, chasing some career or so. And then I realized, no, it should be my authentic path, right? And that's my journey now. So sometimes I like to work hard, and sometimes I know I need to make nice memories, and I go on a trip to Costa Rica, for example. So making the most out of life in a way that you challenge yourself, but that you also take good care of yourself. I think I'm doing that also because I realized that life is not forever when I lost my father. Yeah,
beautiful. I think that more people can use that kind of mindset. I think, like, I don't really live your life like it would be your last or something. I think that's also the other extreme maybe. But like sometimes be more conscious and in a moment. I think that's something that a lot of people could use.
Yeah, so given that you can't change a fact like losing someone or so, I am grateful that it learned me that, and that I think it brings a lot of value in my life, and in that way that it has some it also brought me something, because I know I can't change it, of course. Otherwise, I would change it. But sometimes we need to experience something bad in life, right? That hits us to realize something important. And I think if that wouldn't have happened, I'm not sure if I would be on this spot. I think so to a certain degree, but I think I might have had a few more years before I realized that I should maybe make some changes or so.
It
so
feels like it speeded up the process a little bit. I think
it really strengthened that drive to walk my own path or so. Yeah.
And if you look a little bit into the future, like also to be very conscious about life and make good decisions, like what are the things that you still want to achieve?
Becoming a father, becoming a husband, stuff like that. Yeah. And this morning I received a newsletter of a friend of mine who was also a trainer, and he had this saying. I think it was from Carl Jung, and it said something like, if the path that you're walking if it's really clear, it's probably not your path, and then it's probably someone else's path. And so if someone would ask me, what are you doing in 5 years? I don't know. Yeah, but I'm pretty sure I will be doing the right thing because chances come on my path, and of course I'm also looking for chances and new opportunities. And I'm doing that now with, for example, starting my own retreat and starting that program for people who want to start their own business as well. So I'm looking for the opportunities, but sometimes opportunities also find me. And I know that I have strong values that I'm loyal to, and I know that I'm on the right path. And I don't know, it will bring me hopefully a lot of good stuff, and every now and then, something bad will happen, and then try to see if I can learn from that and get through that storm. But that's life. Yeah,
super nice, awesome. I have 3 final questions, but before that, I'll summarize the episode a little bit. I think we had a really cool conversation about your path that first, I think, worked really linear and then a really certain direction of like building more this career kind of stuff. But I think at one point you really found your true self through traveling, through breathwork, through cold exposure. That led you now to build a really cool company, which is called Boost Your Flow. And I think that there's a lot of work in this field to be done. I think we could have talked probably for hours about high performance cultures, about team building, about how to change things on a work floor. But I think that we will leave up to the HR podcast out there. Thank you so much for joining. Before we leave off, I always ask the same questions to the guests, and so I'm also going to ask that to you. And the first question is, what are you learning right now that you're not good at?
That's a good question. Well, one thing that I'm really working on that I realize that I'm not good at is setting boundaries and stepping up for myself and not always being that chilled guy who probably is very flexible, and if you want to change some things last moment, always says, no worries. And I also realized that it's important to stand your ground and say, hey, I don't like this. This is against my values on how I like to work with someone, but also in friendship, that you can say, hey, I don't appreciate you changing our dinner for 2 or 3 times in a row, for example. Just, standing your ground. And I think maybe that's the other side of the medal of, like you shared, that you say, hey, you look really calm. Now I want to also build that, but that strength a bit more. So I just shared with you, I just come from a jiu-jitsu class, which is of course martial arts, and that really helps me to be powerful and to set your boundaries while still being respectful and remaining that calmness. So that's something that I'm really working on, that I realized that I could really use to keep developing myself. Yeah,
super nice. What name would you give this chapter of your life?
Finding flow.
Finding flow.
Yeah.
And the last question is, if you could send a SMS to all mobile phones in the world, what would you say?
Don't go for the ordinary.
Don't go for the ordinary.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yves, thank you so much for coming on to the 301 podcast. It was a really, really nice conversation.
Thank you for inviting me. Yeah,
you're very welcome.
Yeah.
And for you, it's the time to subscribe, like, and comment. I know that many people watch this podcast, but not everyone is subscribed yet. So there are over 80% of people not subscribed, but they're watching. So if you're that person, go like and subscribe and comment to the 301 podcast. And we are back with a new episode in 2 weeks' time.